They say the old mill at Willow Creek doesn't just grind corn. It grinds time, memory, and occasionally flesh. And they say that once you hear the low rhythmic groan of its water wheel late at night, your story is already written, in ink the color of dried river mud and regret. The air in the Oregon Cascades always smelled like wet pine needles and a century of untouched secrets. For Ben Carver, a disgraced investigative journalist seeking a cheap escape from New York scrutiny, Willow Creek seemed perfect, isolated, unremarkable, and utterly forgettable. It was the kind of place you went to disappear, not to uncover a story that could shatter the fragile barrier between reality and pure, inescapable horror. Ben was renting a cabin 20 miles outside the nearest recognizable town, nestled deep within the whispering, oppressive shadow of the forest. His mission was simple: write a non-fiction book about America's most famous unsolved missing persons case, the 1973 disappearance of the entire settlement of Willow Creek Mill, a community of 23 souls who vanished overnight, leaving behind only half-eaten suppers and open doors. It was a true crime gold mine, but Ben felt detached. Until the day he found the journal. He had driven into the abandoned settlement, just a cluster of dilapidated shacks surrounding a massive water-powered grain mill that still stood stubbornly against the weather. The mill was the heart of the mystery, a hulking monument of damp wood and rusted iron built in the 1850s. On his fourth visit, while meticulously mapping the ground floor, Ben noticed a loose floorboard beneath the main grinding stone. Curiosity, the trait that had both made and ruined his career, flared up. He pried the board open. Inside the cramped, dust-choked cavity was a single item, a leather-bound journal, brittle with age and sealed shut with dried mud. Ben carefully carried it back to his lonely cabin. That night, under the harsh glow of his desk lamp, he opened it. The handwriting was meticulous, old-fashioned, and disturbingly beautiful. The date on the first page read, August 14, 1873. The journal belonged to Elias Thorne, the mill owner and de facto leader of the original Willow Creek settlement. Today, the river spoke, not in rushing water, but in a voice deep and hollow as the hollow of my chest. It demanded a tithe, a bargain it called it, sealed in the dust of the old grinding stone. I have done what was necessary to ensure the harvest, but the eyes of the other villagers hold suspicion. I must record everything, for fear that if I do not, the truth itself will be lost in the grind. Ben felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach. This wasn't local history. This was a confession. He devoured the next few pages. Elias wrote of terrible droughts and failed harvests. The settlers were starving. Then, the night of a sudden torrential downpour, Elias described a ritual near the mill's water wheel, involving the giving of memory and the promise of sustenance. The journal entries became more manic, the writing less steady. September 10th, 1873. We are saved. The crops, unbelievable. They grow tall and fat overnight. The wheat glows with an unnatural vibrancy. But the men? They forget things, simple things, their children's names, the day of the week. They say they feel hollowed out, as if their heads are filled with river fog. September 18th, 1873. Agnes saw it. A reflection in the milling trough. Not her own face, but a hungry, elongated shadow. I told her it was the fever, but I know better. The bargain is taking its payment. The river keeps its promises, but it demands the soul's coinage. Ben leaned back, wiping sweat from his forehead. This wasn't just a tale of a religious cult or mass suicide. Elias Thorne was documenting a supernatural transaction, A pact with something ancient that resided in the Willow Creek water, something that traded physical abundance for intangible things, memories, sanity, and finally, lives. The journal documented a horrific pattern. As the crops thrived, the settlers became shadows of themselves. They began to speak in a strange, recursive dialect, repeating phrases and forgetting to breathe between sentences. Then they simply started to disappear, one by one. The final terrifying entry was barely legible. October 31st, 1873. It is all gone. The others, they walked into the mill house, drawn by the whisper of the wheel. I could not stop them. It is dark now, and I feel the water rising inside me. It needs the last witness. The bargain is complete. But I have left this. The truth must survive the grind. When the water wheel stops, the hunger sleeps. But when the water flows again, the ink dissolved into a spatter of what looked suspiciously like old blood, and the journal ended. Ben closed the book. The air in his cabin felt heavy and cold, despite the crackling fire. Elias Thorne's settlement had vanished in 1873, but the famous missing persons case Ben was investigating occurred almost exactly a century later, 1973. He grabbed his laptop and furiously typed, Willow Creek Mill, 1973. The local Historical Society archives confirmed it. In 1973, a small, independent group of back-to-the-land homesteaders had attempted to re-establish the Willow Creek Mill settlement. They even renovated the old mill house and reactivated the water wheel. And then, they vanished. Ben looked at the journal. The curse was cyclical. It was tied to the water wheel. The water wheel had been silent for 100 years, and when it turned again, the horror awoke, demanding its feast. He jumped up, adrenaline flooding his system. He needed to get back to the mill, find the source of the water, and stop whatever was turning that ancient mechanism. He grabbed his car keys and his most powerful flashlight. It was 11:47 p.m., the night of November 24th. As Ben walked toward the door, his phone buzzed. It was a text from his editor, whom he hadn't spoken to in weeks. Editor: Hey Ben, I know you're hiding out. Just saw something weird in the old newspaper archives, a tiny snippet about Willow Creek. They say before the 1973 disappearances, people heard this sound, a low, rhythmic groan, like a massive grinding stone starting up on its own. Ben froze. He could hear it now, not outside, but vibrating through the floorboards of his cabin. A low, rhythmic groan. The sound of the Willow Creek water wheel, turning in the deep forest. He was 20 miles away, but the sound was already here. The story was no longer something he was investigating. The story had found him. He threw the door open and sprinted to his truck. The forest road was a ribbon of blackness. He drove too fast, his tires spitting gravel. The whole time, the low, powerful thump, thump, thump of the unseen water wheel kept time with his pounding heart. He arrived at the mill settlement at exactly midnight. The air was dead still. No wind, no animals. And there it was. We go lower, not a straight line. We curve. We dig a drainage channel first, parallel to the main tunnel, but deeper. It will capture the river before it breaches the main bore. It will take longer, but we will finish. The line will be safe. Longer? Eli whispered. They will crucify me back east if I report a delay. The Union Pacific is closing the gap. You want a marvel of engineering, Mr. Thorne? Alun asked, his eyes piercing in the lamplight. Or a glorious, famous failure? Eli looked from the diagram in the dust to the endless black wall of the mountain. He made his choice, a choice that would define his entire career, and perhaps the story of the American West. Do it, Eli said, but you'll report your progress only to me. And if this works, I'll need to know everything else you've heard the Earth say. Alun nodded, his face returning to its familiar placid mask. The mountain has many stories, Mr. Thorne, many secrets. You have only just begun to listen. The next few weeks were a fever dream for Eli. He lied to the surveyors, fabricating minor issues with the rock strata to explain the deviation in the line. He lied to the payroll, creating a special experimental shoring crew, which was, in reality, Alun's team digging their secret drainage tunnel. The pressure was immense. But in the quiet hours after sunset, he would stand at the mouth of Alun's new bore, watching the disciplined, silent work. There were no shouts, no slacking, only the rhythm of the picks and the metallic scrape of the shovels. They worked in shifts that defied human endurance, fueled by a collective dedication that Eli couldn't comprehend. Then, one rainy, miserable morning, it happened. A deep, steady gurgle was heard, followed by a rush. Alun's drainage tunnel, dug 20 feet below the main line, had intercepted a powerful underground torrent. Water, clear, cold, and fast, now poured out of the tunnel entrance, safely away from the main construction route. A cheer went up from the few white workers who understood what had just been prevented. O'Malley, who had privately been betting on a collapse, spat on the ground in grudging respect. "The Chinaman's magic held," he muttered to Eli. Eli didn't correct him. It wasn't magic. It was a kind of knowledge that transcended blueprints. With the threat of the river mitigated, the main tunnel could be driven faster than ever before. Eli, now trusting Alun implicitly, began to ask him about other sections of the line. Where was the rock softest? Where did the wind pattern shift to deposit the most snow, necessitating a gallery? Where was the cheapest, most stable quarry stone? Alun always had an answer. Not just an answer, but a solution, often rooted in centuries-old Chinese engineering principles, or simply an astonishing intimacy with the natural world. The problem, Alun explained one day, wasn't just the mountain. It was the lack of resources at this altitude. Food, supplies, even clothing, it all had to be hauled up the steep grades, a costly and slow process. "The work is hard," Alun said, using his foot to kick a piece of broken, jagged rock. "But the men do not mind the work. They mind the waste of effort, the waste of good supplies. But we're supplying the camps as fast as the wagons can climb. What is being wasted?" Alun pointed with his chin toward the main supply depot, a crude wooden shed downhill. "Your men eat the dried beef and white flour from the east. Their bodies are built on this. It does not give strength for rock work. My men eat rice, dried fish, vegetables we grow. They are lighter, stronger, and they do not get the same bowel sickness as your white crews." The grinding stone and the first witness. Ben didn't hesitate. The sight of that impossible, smiling child in the window was a jolt of pure, visceral terror that bypassed rational thought and activated sheer survival instinct. He slammed the bolt cutters down, severing the thick steel shackle with a desperate metallic crack. The padlock fell. He shoved the heavy oak door open and stumbled into the black maw of the mill house. The door slammed shut behind him. The internal darkness was absolute, thick and suffocating, smelling of ancient grain dust, damp wood, and something metallic, like blood and rust mixed with river water. The rhythmic churning outside intensified, sounding less like a water wheel and more like a monstrous beating heart. "Daddy says, shut the door tight." The small, reedy voice was immediately behind him. Ben whirled around, scrambling for his flashlight, which had fallen to the floor. His hand found the cold metal. He flicked it on. The beam cut through the air, illuminating the girl. She was standing exactly where the door had just been. Her pale nightgown seemed to absorb the light, making her presence feel like a negative space in the darkness. Ben, gasping, "Who are you? How did you get in here?" The girl tilted her head, her unnaturally wide smile unchanging. She held the silver music box loosely in her hands. The intricate carvings on the box depicted small figures dancing in a circle around a swirling vortex. Girl, sing song. We never left. Daddy just went to sleep. But the water is awake now, and the stone is turning. Ben realized she wasn't interested in a conversation. Her presence was a warning, or perhaps a guard. He had to get past her and up to the grinding room. I need to go up. Upstairs is for the hungry ones. They don't like visitors who still have their skin. A sudden sharp movement from the shadows startled him. A large burlap sack hanging forgotten from a ceiling beam swung violently despite the lack of a breeze. It was followed by a wet slapping sound from the corner of the room. Ben aimed his flashlight. Stacked neatly against the far wall were hundreds of empty grain sacks. But from the shadows between them, a long gray appendage, slick and segmented, retreated quickly. It was too fast for him to properly identify, but it looked horribly organic. He ignored the movement and began backing toward the rough-hewn stairs leading to the second floor, keeping the flashlight fixed on the girl. Ben, stay back. You came for the story, didn't you? Elias left it for you. He didn't want the hunger to hide anymore. As she spoke, the child began to float. Slowly, gracefully, she lifted perhaps a foot off the millhouse floor, her arms remaining at her sides. Her nightgown remained perfectly still. The only sound she made was the soft, continuous tinkling of the music box. This was not a ghost. This was something ancient and elemental, a manifestation of the mill's inherent horror. Ben turned and bolted up the narrow, creaking stairs. The second floor was the main grinding room. It was huge and hollow. In the center sat the enormous flat grinding stone, surrounded by rusted gears and chutes. The sound here was deafening. The thump, thump, thump of the water wheel was amplified by the wooden structure, feeling less like sound and more like kinetic force shaking his teeth loose. He rushed to the window overlooking the creek. The water wheel was spinning impossibly fast now, kicking up a thick, foaming spray that stained the mossy walls a deep, unnerving crimson. The water level was still rising, the creek overflowing its banks. He had to stop the wheel. Ben looked for the mechanism. The main shaft feeding the power from the wheel into the grinding stone ran directly through the center of the room. There had to be a brake, a lever, something to disengage the gears. He spotted it, a heavy iron lever half hidden beneath a pile of old sacking near the main shaft. He ran toward it, slipping on the layer of dust and dampness covering the floor. Just as he reached the lever, the air temperature in the room plummeted and he heard a voice, not the girl's, but a dry, rattling whisper directly above him. He is trying to spoil the harvest. Ben looked up. Hanging upside down from a low beam, their body obscured by shadows, was a figure. It was long and skeletal, clothed in what looked like the remnants of 1973-era denim and plaid, now ripped and covered in mill dust. It moved with the jerky, unnatural grace of a marionette. Ben instinctively raised his light. The face was human, but horribly stretched, its jaw unhinged and wide, revealing row after row of dull, grinding teeth, stained black like the inside of a grinder. It wasn't speaking. The sound was coming from the friction of its teeth rubbing together. It was one of the missing homesteaders, transformed. Before Ben could react, the creature dropped from the beam and landed silently on the floor, its feet twisted backward. It began to scuttle, not walk, toward him, its unnaturally long arms dragging on the dusty wood. Ben had no time for fear. He grabbed the iron lever and pulled with all his strength. The lever resisted. It was rusted stiff and fused with the mechanism. The creature was closing the distance, its jaw opening wider. Ben could smell the stale grain and decay on its breath. He kicked out wildly, catching the creature in the chest. It made a sickening, brittle crack sound, but it barely slowed down, letting out a high-pitched, chitinous hiss. With a desperate cry, Ben threw his full weight onto the lever, using his adrenaline-fueled terror. The iron shrieked in protest. Crack! The lever slammed down. For a single, glorious second, there was silence. The thump, thump, thump stopped. The rhythmic vibration ceased. The mill was utterly, beautifully quiet. Ben collapsed to his knees, gasping. The creature froze instantly, mid-scuttle, its mouth still wide open in its silent scream. It seemed to deflate, its body going limp and still. He had done it. He had stopped the wheel. "You broke our toy." The girl was now standing at the top of the stairs, her floating body illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. The tinkle of the music box was the loudest sound in the suddenly quiet room. "Girl, now the water is angry." Suddenly, the floor beneath Ben's knees began to swell. The water, which had been rising in the creek, was somehow forcing its way up through the foundation, not as a leak, but as a deliberate surge. The grinding stone in the center of the room, which had been dry, began to weep. A dark, oily liquid, the same color as the river sludge, pooled around the central stone. Ben scrabbled backward, away from the rising liquid. "Girl, the pact requires two things to sleep. The turning must stop, and the stone must be dry. But the truth is, the stone is always thirsty." As she spoke, the large, flat grinding stone, perhaps 10 feet in diameter and 6 inches thick, began to lift. Slowly, agonizingly, it rose vertically, suspended by an unseen force. The existence of the invisible city fundamentally shifted Eli Thorne's perspective. He had come west armed with theorems and blueprints. He was now learning that true engineering was an act of listening, observation, and negotiation with nature. His relationship with Alun evolved from boss and laborer to a wary, codependent partnership built entirely on the fragile foundation of the shared secret. The partnership quickly bore fruit. By integrating the invisible city systems into the main operation, Eli achieved a staggering level of efficiency. The Central Pacific's official labor reports showed a sudden, miraculous reduction in lost tool costs, illness-related downtime, and food spoilage. Eli's bosses back in Sacramento, the Big Four, were ecstatic. They didn't know how Eli was achieving these results. They only saw the progress reports finally beating the dreaded Union Pacific's numbers. The mountains, which had been the Central Pacific's curse, were finally becoming their advantage. Alun, meanwhile, was expanding his vision. He didn't just want to lay track efficiently, he wanted to secure the future of his people. One frosty morning, Eli found Alun examining the rail spikes. "The iron horse runs on these nails, yes?" Alun asked, turning a heavy spike over in his palm. "Simple, strong, the heart of the track." "They are vital," Eli confirmed. "We buy them by the ton from the east. Why?" "The quality is poor," Alun said, dropping the spike. "It rang dull on the rock. The steel is cheap, brittle in the cold. We see many cracks. They will not hold when the trains run fast and heavy." Eli knew the quality was subpar, a common cost-cutting measure by Eastern suppliers. But he was powerless to change the contracts. "What is your solution, Alun?" Eli asked, bracing himself. "The mountain provides better iron," Alun stated, pointing toward a ridge. "Our miners have found pockets of high-grade hematite near the main quarry. Our blacksmiths are skilled. If we forge our own spikes, the cost will be less, the quality higher. We will stop buying the Eastern trash." "Forge them here?" Eli stared. "You're talking about setting up a foundry, a rolling mill. That's a massive operation, Alun. The smoke, the noise, it can't be hidden." "We do not hide the smoke," Alun corrected him. "We hide the reason for the smoke. We tell your foreman that we are building the snow galleries." The snow galleries were massive, half-mile-long wooden sheds designed to cover the track in the deepest snow zones. They required enormous amounts of iron strapping and bolts. "We will tell them we need a specialized, temporary forge to create the unique iron straps for the gallery roofs," Alun explained, his eyes sparkling with cunning. "We will make the straps, but in the long night shifts, we make the superior track spikes. We will call the temporary forge the gallery workshop. No one will ask questions about the smoke of necessity." This was not just ingenious, it was a brazen, organized act of corporate espionage and quiet theft. They would be stealing company resources and time to manufacture a crucial proprietary component right under the company's nose. The archives of the forgotten. Ben burst out of the mill house and slammed the heavy oak door shut, fumbling desperately to reattach the cut padlock. His heart hammered against his ribs. His breath came in ragged, painful gasps. The silence was immediately broken by the muffled, angry sounds from within, the scraping of sharp, brittle nails on wood, and the deep, gurgling whisper of Elias Thorne echoing through the thick walls. He managed to jam the broken shackle back into place, securing the heavy steel pin. It wouldn't hold long against whatever was in there, but it bought him precious minutes. The water wheel was still silent. The ground had stopped shaking. The river, however, remained unnaturally high, churning with that ominous coppery-colored foam. Ben didn't look back. He ran to his truck, threw himself inside, and sped away from the mill settlement, not stopping until the dim, flickering light of his own isolated cabin appeared through the trees 20 miles away. He locked every door, secured every window, and collapsed onto his worn leather armchair, clutching Thorne's journal to his chest. He had touched the supernatural. He had faced the source of the Willow Creek disappearances. The 1973 homesteaders hadn't vanished. They had been absorbed, turned into grinding mechanisms and guardians for the ancient entity sleeping beneath the stone. The girl was a pure manifestation, a lure woven from the fear and memories the mill had consumed. Ben spent the next 24 hours in a state of hypervigilance, fueled by bad coffee and pure terror. He knew the mill was an anomaly, a geographically contained curse. But he also knew the curse required a witness, someone to find the truth, record it, and perhaps become the next sacrifice to ensure the cycle continued. Elias Thorne had written the book. Was Ben Carver destined to be the next chapter? He couldn't rely on the police. His story would land him in a padded cell. He needed proof, historical, undeniable proof that the mill operated on an occult timeline. He focused on the key element, the pact. Elias Thorne mentioned making a bargain to save the harvest. This implied the horror wasn't inherent to the land, but to the water. Ben decided to risk one trip back to civilization. He needed a deeper dive into the region's history, beyond the local newspaper snippets he'd already accessed. He needed the state archives. The next morning, armed with dark sunglasses and a desperate hope for normalcy, Ben drove 2 hours to the State Historical Library in Portland. The sheer normalcy of the library was almost painful. Students tapping on keyboards, librarians organizing dusty volumes, the smell of clean paper. It was a world away from the metallic stench and wet decay of Willow Creek. Ben went straight to the restricted sections, presenting his journalist credentials. He requested everything they had on the original Hudson River Valley settlers, the wave of migration in the 1850s that founded the small, now forgotten settlements in the Cascades. Hours later, hunched over a heavy, brittle ledger from 1858, he found it. It wasn't a horror story, but a property dispute. The ledger detailed the original purchase of the land for the Willow Creek Mill. The document mentioned the mill's founder, Silas Blackwood, a mysterious and deeply religious man who had purchased the land from a specific, almost forgotten tribe of the Kalapuya people, the Tualatin Band. The gold you mentioned, Eli realized. The secret vein. Alun nodded. The Big Four seek gold. They have hired many parties to survey the slopes for stray veins. They have failed because they only look for surface deposits, shallow and easy. The true vein, the dragon's spine, runs deep. It follows the line of granite we are tunneling through. Alun unrolled a brittle piece of parchment, not a blueprint, but a complex, hand-drawn map covered in intricate ideograms and subtle topographical details that Eli only vaguely understood. This map, Alun explained, is old, passed through my family. It details the mineral seams of this region, brought by a Chinese merchant who visited California long before your ships arrived. It shows that the richest seam of gold is contained within the same granite slab that makes up Tunnel 6. Tunnel 6 was the most dangerous section of the entire project, slated to be blasted through next winter. It was a granite monolith demanding the heaviest use of nitroglycerin. You want to mine the gold while we are building the tunnel? Eli whispered. That's suicidal. It's too unstable. The gold is not what makes it unstable, Alun said. The dragon's spine is encased in soft quartz, easily mined. The instability comes from the nitroglycerin that your company will use to break the granite. Nitroglycerin is clumsy. It makes great speed, yes, but it cracks the surrounding rock, weakening the mountain. If the quartz vein is cracked, the gold is lost to the rubble and the snow. Alun paused, leaning closer. The secret is not how to take the gold, but how to tunnel through the granite without the shattering force of the great blasts. We need to cut, not break. But cutting granite is impossible with the timeline we have, Eli protested. It would take years. Not with your tools, Alun countered, his eyes glinting. With the mountain's tools. Alun led Eli back toward the gallery workshop, but instead of entering, he stopped at a small, sealed-off compartment carved into the rock face. Alun lit a match and held it up, revealing a stack of strange, heavy iron rings wrapped in canvas. These are fire pickets, Alun explained, an ancient method. We drill small, precise holes into the granite. Not one large hole for the blast, but a dozen tiny ones in a line. Then we insert the pickets, fill the holes with water, and heat the metal until the granite splits, not shatters, along the line of the cut. Quietly, precisely. This way, the gold remains safe. The precision required was astronomical. It would require extraordinary skill and meticulous patience, and it was incredibly slow. This will take 10 times longer than blasting, Alun, Eli said, despairing. We will lose months. I can't hide that kind of delay. You can, Alun said simply. You told your bosses that Tunnel 6 is the hardest rock in the Sierra. You told them to expect delays. Now you tell them it is even harder than you thought. You will tell them we must revert to the slower, safer hammer and chisel method because the rock is too fractured for nitro. You will tell them it is the price of safety. And the company will hate it, Eli finished, already feeling the hot breath of the Big Four on his neck. They will be alive to hate it, Alun countered. And they will have a railroad that does not collapse. We take the time, we use the fire pickets, we secure the tunnel, and we retrieve the gold. And the gold, where does it go? It leaves the mountain in the pockets of the laborers who go home, Alun stated. No big shipments, no sudden fortunes. A few ounces on each man who leaves for San Francisco. A slow, steady stream. Enough to buy back the family heirlooms. Enough to secure land in America. Enough to buy their freedom. Eli looked at the fire pickets, symbols of patience, tradition, and quiet subversion. He looked back toward the invisible city, a monument to self-reliance. And he knew that the true story of the Transcontinental Railroad wasn't about the speed of its construction, but the price of its human cost and the quiet, revolutionary ways in which that cost was being repaid. He was no longer just building a railroad. He was complicit in the establishment of a hidden financial and cultural dynasty. "Let's start with the fire pickets," Eli said, a sense of profound and thrilling danger settling over him. "We'll call the new method the silent bore. But if you are wrong about the quartz, Alun, we're all going to be crushed by the mountain." Alun did not smile. "The mountain tells me no lies, Mr. Thorne. Only men do." The commencement of the silent bore at Tunnel 6 was an exercise in managing mounting external pressure. As Alun's specialized teams deployed the fire pickets, the official progress charts flatlined. The Central Pacific's daily mileage plummeted from feet to mere inches. The reaction from the east was immediate and savage. Telegrams arrived daily, crackling with fury and impatience. One particularly caustic message from Collis B. Huntington, one of the Big Four, was pinned to Eli's map. "Thorne, explain this crawl. Are you digging with teaspoons? The Union Pacific will meet us in the Utah desert, and your legacy will be a hole in the ground. Fix it. Now. CPH." Eli, protected only by the astonishing successes of the prior months, held firm. He dispatched detailed, dense reports filled with technical jargon about metamorphic shear fracture zones and the necessity of controlled thermal degradation to maintain tunnel integrity. He made the process sound excruciatingly technical and vitally important, leveraging his Harvard education as a shield. He only told one truth, that the work was agonizingly slow. The reality was far more focused and intense than his reports implied. Inside the granite heart of Tunnel 6, the silent bore was a highly specialized dual operation. The operation within the granite. The forward face, tunneling. Alun's main crew used the fire pickets. Tiny, precise holes were drilled, the picks heated to white-hot temperatures by small charcoal burners, and the resulting thermal shock split the granite along predetermined lines. The resulting blocks were clean, massive, and easily removed. This technique, though slow, minimized vibrations and protected the surrounding rock structure. The flank, mining. Following just 30 feet behind the tunneling crew, a secondary, smaller team mined the gold. Alun's ancestral map had been flawlessly accurate. The dragon spine, the rich vein of free-milling quartz laced with spectacular amounts of high-grade gold, ran diagonally across the tunnel's path. The miners used small, hand-powered drills and careful chisels to extract the quartz vein, leaving the surrounding granite intact. The extracted quartz was immediately sacked and taken out in sealed, nondescript canvas bags labeled simply rock samples. The secrecy demanded a complete separation from the main work crews. The Irish and European laborers, who were still vital for timber shoring and rail laying outside the tunnel, were convinced the Chinese crews were performing black magic inside the mountain, a necessary myth that helped guard the secret. One afternoon, O'Malley, the foreman, cornered Eli, his face grimy and his eyes bloodshot from the stress. "Mr. Thorne, you gotta tell me, what are they doing in there? I hear no thunder of the nitro, only a low hiss and the tap, tap, tap. They've been on that mile for 4 months. The lads are talking about sabotage. They say the Chinamen are building a temple in there, not a tunnel." Eli fixed O'Malley with a serious gaze. "They are saving your life, O'Malley. The rock in Tunnel 6 is dangerously unstable. Any major blast would cause a massive cave-in. Alun's method, the silent bore, is a proprietary technique that removes the rock in massive interlocking blocks, ensuring the roof doesn't fall on our heads." He paused, lowering his voice conspiratorially. "I've ordered total secrecy on the process. If word gets out that the tunnel is fragile, the stock price will crash and we'll all lose our jobs.
You see the result. The tunnel stands. Now keep your man working the timber and keep your mouth shut. O'Malley, convinced by Eli's sincerity and the fear of losing his pay, nodded grimly. Aye, sir. Secret technique. Silent bore. Just don't ask me to go in there. The black market of heritage. Meanwhile, the invisible city was processing its stolen wealth. In the subterranean vault, a meticulous operation was underway. The quartz was crushed by specialized water-powered stamp mills built and hidden deep in a narrow gorge, ensuring the sound was muffled by the running water. The gold dust was separated using traditional panning and mercury amalgamation, a dangerous but highly effective process. The resulting small gold bars and dust were not simply hoarded, they were transformed. Alun had established a sophisticated covert distribution network. The gold was funneled in two ways. The payback. Tiny amounts of dust were subtly added to the wages of the Chinese laborers who had fulfilled their contracts and were leaving the railroad for the cities. They would arrive in San Francisco with the expected amount of silver, plus a hidden valuable supplement. This extra wealth allowed them to immediately establish businesses, purchase property, or fund passages for family, cementing their freedom and independence without raising the suspicions of customs or bank officials. The buyback. Larger molded bars were entrusted to select trusted couriers, often laundrymen or cooks, who traveled frequently between the camps and San Francisco. This gold was used to repurchase the cultural artifacts, the ancient silks, scrolls, and jades sold off in desperation. Alun wasn't just hoarding wealth, he was rebuilding the community's cultural history, piece by painstaking piece. The scale of the mining was staggering. Within 6 months, the Tunnel 6 operation, while agonizingly slow on the official timeline, had quietly yielded nearly 4 tons of raw gold. It was a private fortune, easily equaling the annual revenue of the Central Pacific itself. The price of exposure. The delay, however, was becoming untenable. The Union Pacific, having surged across the flat plains, was rapidly approaching the agreed-upon meeting point in Utah. The Big Four demanded Eli come to Sacramento for an immediate and conclusive explanation. Eli knew he couldn't stall any longer. He left O'Malley in charge, gave Alun a specific deadline, and took the train down the precarious half-finished track to the capital. The meeting was a disaster. Leland Stanford, the company president, was purple with rage. "You have given us the slowest, most embarrassing stretch of track in American history, Thorne," Stanford roared, slamming his fist on the mahogany table. "While they celebrate the UP's progress, we are the butt of every joke in the East." Eli presented his case, detailing the dangers of the rock, the success of the silent bore in preventing catastrophic collapses, and the superior quality of the resulting tunnel. "We have a tunnel that will last 500 years, gentlemen," Eli insisted. "It is an engineering marvel of precision, not brute force." "Precision is for watchmakers, Thorne, not railroad builders," snapped Charles Crocker. "We need speed. I hear rumors of your Chinese crews engaging in alternative techniques. Are you resorting to ancient magic now, Thorne? This is America."
This is Mrs. Helen Vance. She was driving to her daughter's graduation. Unfortunately, her car developed a sudden fault near the old logging road. A simple, predictable occurrence. She is the replacement witness. Ben understood immediately. Mr. Gray had brought a fresh, sane mind, a mind that knew nothing of the horror, to observe and absorb the madness, allowing the cycle to complete without Ben's involvement. Mr. Gray, she will find the journal. She will enter the mill. She will witness the turning. And then the spirit will feed on her truth, and you, Mr. Carver, will simply be excess material. As if on cue, the muffled, hungry scratching from inside the locked mill house intensified, sounding like a dozen animals fighting to get out. "Let her go! This is between me and that thing!" Mr. Gray shaking his head. "It is never just between two people. The mill requires a community, and the community requires a story." Mr. Gray pointed toward the mill house. From the second-story window, the small girl in the nightgown appeared again. But this time, she was not alone. Behind her stood two figures, the skeletal, backward-walking creature Ben had seen, and another, older figure, draped in what looked like the remnants of an 1870s linen shirt. They were staring out, anticipating the arrival of the new witness. Mr. Gray took a single, deliberate step toward Mrs. Vance, gently pushing her toward the millhouse door. Ben dropped the sledgehammer and lunged, tackling Mr. Gray. They hit the soggy ground with a loud thwump. Mr. Gray was surprisingly strong, his body hard and unyielding despite his slender frame. Mr. Gray, in a dry, furious whisper, "Fool, you cannot intervene in the ritual." Ben grabbed a handful of the man's dusty suit and slammed his head repeatedly against the wet earth. He felt a moment of pure, blinding rage, the rage of a cornered man fighting something inhuman. Mr. Gray didn't bleed. His face, when Ben finally pulled back, was unmarked, but his eyes were blazing with a cold, pale light. "The spirit is awakened now. You have forced its hand." He let out a sharp, bird-like cry. Instantly, the entire area was plunged into chaos. The creek water, which had been high but manageable, roared into a massive wave. The flow slammed against the mill structure. And then the sound returned. Thump, thump, thump. The water wheel was turning again, incredibly fast. Mr. Gray had found a way to activate the mechanism remotely, perhaps simply by drawing the mill's attention. The terror on Mrs. Vance's face was replaced by a strange, numb curiosity. Her eyes went blank, her shoulders slumped, and she began to walk, slow and steady, toward the millhouse door. She was being drawn in. Ben knew he had seconds. He couldn't fight Mr. Gray and save the woman. He made a brutal decision. He grabbed the heavy marine rope, looped it around a nearby granite slab, and wrapped the other end tightly around Mr. Gray's chest. "You wanted the current? Take it." He kicked Mr. Gray hard, rolling the man toward the creek's bank. The rising water immediately began to pull on the man and the rope. Mr. Gray didn't fight the rope. He simply smiled that thin, horrible smile as the cold river water engulfed him. The next 48 hours were a blur of adrenaline, exhaustion, and high-stakes danger. Eli Thorne was now completely transformed from a nervous engineer into an active conspirator, dedicating himself to running interference against the Central Pacific itself. Day 1. Mining the Dragon's Spine. Eli's primary job was to create a zone of absolute isolation around Tunnel 6. He ordered O'Malley to halt all external work, rail laying, timber cutting, and hauling on the pretext of an emergency structural assessment inside the tunnel, claiming he needed silence to monitor subtle shifts in the rock. "Not a sound, O'Malley. If I hear so much as a hammer strike, I'll have your job. We are saving the entire line," Eli barked, playing the role of the stressed-out engineer to perfection. O'Malley, already intimidated by the silent bore mythology, enforced the quiet with a stern, fear-driven zeal. The main camp ground to a halt. Inside Tunnel 6, Ah Lun's operation was running at a frantic pace. The miners were deep in the quartz vein, using short, precise strikes of chisels and picks to pry the gold-laden rock free. The temperature inside the mountain was stable, but the intensity of the labor produced a stifling heat, compounded by the flickering light of whale oil lamps. Ah Lun managed the process with ruthless efficiency.
The gold quartz ore was immediately placed into small, heavy leather sacks, sealed with wax, and carried out by a dedicated chain of laborers known as the silent carriers. Eli stood guard at the tunnel entrance, his father's pocket watch clutched in his hand, marking the brutal ticking passage of time. He watched as the sacks of gold, perhaps worth more than he would earn in 10 lifetimes, were silently transported past him. "How much longer, Ah-Lun?" Eli demanded when the foreman briefly emerged, his face smeared with sweat and gold dust. "The vein is rich," Ah-Lun replied, his voice hoarse, "richer than the old map promised. The last pocket is almost cleared. Perhaps 5 more hours of digging. Then we must seal." 5 hours. That would put them late into the night. A crisis erupted shortly after sunset. A delegation of white laborers, led by a surly, ambitious man named Jed, came to the tunnel mouth. "We ain't sitting around idle, Mr. Thorne," Jed complained, gesturing to the silent camp below. "The Central Pacific pays us to work, not to stare at granite. We hear that the Chinamen are getting special treatment. We demand to know what structural assessment means." Eli knew this was not just about work, it was about suspicion and racial resentment. He couldn't risk them rushing the tunnel and discovering the truth. Thinking fast, Eli pulled out his pistol and fired a shot into the air. The sudden crack echoed violently off the granite walls. "It means," Eli roared, leveling the gun at Jed, "that the mountain is talking to me, and I need silence to hear it. The timbers we just installed are cracking under a stress that I have never seen before. If you make one sound, you risk the roof falling in. Now get back to your tents and wait for my orders, or I swear I'll shoot the first man who jeopardizes this line." The laborers, seeing the frantic desperation in Eli's eyes and the gun in his hand, backed away, grumbling but terrified. Eli's sudden authoritarian display was exactly what they expected from an American boss under pressure. The well of identity. Ben stumbled back into the mill house, this time with a grim resolve that eclipsed fear. The smell of copper, wet earth, and something indescribably rotten was overwhelming. The entire structure was shaking violently, the roaring of the accelerated water wheel a physical assault on his ears. He didn't waste time on the first floor. He sprinted up the groaning stairs to the grinding room, clutching the sledgehammer in one hand and Elias Thorne's journal in the other. The sight that greeted him on the second floor was a vortex of madness. The grinding stone was still vertical, suspended unnaturally above the black water-filled pit. The pool beneath it was churning, and in the center, Elias Thorne's preserved, waterlogged head was bobbing faster, tethered by its strange root system. The black water had risen and now lapped over the edges of the pit, threatening to flood the entire room. And they were all awake. The spectral child floated near the center, her music box tinkling a furious, high-pitched rhythm that sliced through the roar of the wheel. The skeletal creature, the 1973 homesteader, and the linen-shrouded figure, the 1873 settler, scuttled on the rafters and supports, their jointed limbs clicking like dry sticks. They weren't attacking yet. They were waiting. They were watching the witness return for the final performance. Child, her voice now competing with the roar, sounding like static. "You came back, witness. The hunger is high. The wheel turns for you." Elias Thorne, gurgling from the pit. "Write it down, Carver. Let the truth survive the grind. We need you to write it." Ben realized their intention. They didn't want to simply kill him. They wanted him to fully document the terror, to record the truth so the spirit could consume it, the ultimate meal of self-awareness and terror, and then use that recording to lure the next victim. He hurled the sledgehammer away from the pit, aiming for the main wooden support beam near the wall. "Ben, I'm not writing anything. I'm ending this."
He ran toward the beam, but the child darted in front of him, floating low to the ground. Child, Daddy says pay attention. You must see what you have done. She pointed a thin gray finger at the pit. The black water surged. From the swirling darkness, a vast pale shape emerged momentarily. Not a monster, but a face. It was immense, featureless, and concave, like a depression in the water itself. It was the Chakwamaswalix, the eating spirit. A wave of crushing despair and total forgetfulness hit Ben. For a moment, he couldn't remember his own name. He couldn't remember why he was holding the journal. He couldn't remember the face of his editor or the city he came from. He was hollow, empty. The spirit was drinking his memories. He fought the emptiness with a singular, desperate thought. The hammer. He lunged for the sledgehammer he had thrown earlier. As he did, the skeletal creature dropped from the rafters, blocking his path. It landed silently, its grinding teeth clicking maniacally. Ben didn't hesitate. He sidestepped the creature and used the antique axe he was carrying, swinging it low and fast. The axe blade met the creature's twisted shin bone with a sickening thwack of dry bone splintering. The creature let out a high-pitched, rattling scream and collapsed, its unnatural body unable to heal or cope with physical injury. Ben snatched up the sledgehammer. The linen-shrouded figure, the 1873 settler, dropped from above, lunging at Ben's back. Ben whirled and swung the hammer like a baseball bat, connecting with the figure's rib cage. The old bones and dry linen exploded in a cloud of dust and brittle shards. He was finally alone with the spirit and its lure. The child looked stunned, her music box slowing to a stutter. Child, a cracked whisper. "You are fighting the story. You can't change the truth." Ben stood before the main support beam, ignoring the stinging pain of the lost memories. He raised the hammer high. "Ben, the truth is, this mill is coming down." He slammed the hammer into the beam near the foundation. Bam! A heavy vibration shuddered through the structure. The spirit reacted instantly. The massive grinding stone, suspended vertically, began to lean, not toward Ben, but toward the black pit. Elias Thorne, a final frantic gurgle. "The stone must turn! The contract!" The child let out a scream that was a pure, horrifying tone, no longer a child, but the shriek of a demonic frequency. The stone crashed back onto the wooden floor over the pit. Crackoom! The impact sent a tidal wave of the black, foul water sweeping across the room. Ben was soaked in the horrific liquid, which tasted of metal and decay. The grinding stone had resealed the pit, but the creature's final act of desperation was complete. Elias Thorne's head was nowhere to be seen, having been crushed back into the water by the descending stone. The child, however, was still floating, now above the grinding stone, and she was furious. "Child, you did not stop it. The water still flows. The spirit is angry." The water wheel outside went from a roar to an impossible hyperspeed shriek. The entire mill structure began to twist and groan, the wood protesting against the unnatural force. Ben knew he had minutes before the whole building ripped apart. He had failed to destroy the dam, but the mill was the epicenter. If he destroyed the main support, the mill would collapse into the river, disrupting the redirection and hopefully crushing the spirit's focal point, the grinding stone. He slammed the sledgehammer into the beam again and again. Bam! Bam! The wood cracked, dust rained down. The child screamed, flying toward him, her empty eyes fixed on his face. She raised her arms, her hands elongated and gray, like the creatures he had seen earlier. "Child, you will be the new daddy. You will grind." Ben had time for one final swing.
He ducked the child's desperate grasp, his own hand flying to his chest, where he still clutched the journal. He brought the sledgehammer down with all his remaining strength. Crass snap! The main support beam snapped with the sound of a pistol shot. The entire mill house listed violently. The sound of rending wood, snapping joists, and rushing water became deafening. The child inches from Ben's face suddenly went limp. Her terrifying eyes went dull, and she began to dissolve, turning into a plume of white cold steam that was immediately swallowed by the chaotic sound. The spirit was momentarily silenced. Ben felt the floor tilting beneath his feet. He threw himself toward the window opening, launching himself out just as the mill structure completely gave way. He hit the rising river water with a bone-jarring splash. The Willow Creek Mill, the site of 2 centuries of packs and horror, collapsed into the raging river with a massive, final, catastrophic roar. The grinding stone, the machinery, and the entire wooden edifice were submerged, ripped apart by the force of the redirected current, finally giving way to the water it had tried to control. Ben fought the current, surfacing and gasping for air. He was battered, freezing, and spitting black metallic water. He was alive. He pulled himself onto the muddy bank, collapsing next to Mrs. Vance, who was still locked in the truck, her eyes wide but thankfully regaining focus. The water wheel was silent, the dam was intact, but the mill was gone.
The aftermath and the final entry. Days later, Ben Carver was gone from the cabin. He had driven Mrs. Vance to a distant hospital, giving a vague story about a sudden blackout and a car crash. He knew Mr. Gray would be looking for him. He was sitting in a sterile motel room in a city 3 states away, wrapped in blankets, his body aching, his mind fragmented. Many of his recent memories were gone. The faces of old colleagues, the exact circumstances of his disgrace in New York, all consumed by the spirit. But the core truth remained. The mill was the mouth, and the turning had stopped. He looked at the only thing he had saved, Elias Thorne's leather journal. It was waterlogged and partially ruined, but Ben had protected it. He opened it, flipping through the crinkled pages, remembering the horror of the pit and the child's final shriek. As he reached the end, he noticed that the final, old blood-stained entry from 1873 was no longer the end. Beneath Thorne's frantic handwriting, a new, meticulously written entry had appeared in a different hand, slightly faded, written in black ink, the ink of Ben's own pen, which he had carried with him. November 25th, 2025. I am the witness. The mill is destroyed. The pact is broken. The structure which directed the current is gone. The spirit sleeps, for the mouth is closed, and the stone lies crushed. The truth has been written and will not feed the hunger. The cycle ends here. Ben Carver, final witness. Ben stared at the page. He hadn't written that. His hand hadn't moved. But the words were his, recording the conclusion. A shiver ran down his spine. The spirit feeds on the written truth, but the witness also records the truth. He had saved the world from the horror, but in doing so, he had become the final, most potent witness. He reached for a match and the journal. He had to destroy it. The truth must not survive the grind. Just as he lit the match, his phone rang. It was an unknown number. He hesitated, then answered. Ben, hello? The voice on the other end was dry, thin, and impossibly calm. Mr. Gray, voice crackling. The structure is temporary, Mr. Carver. The current is not. And the spirit is patient. It will find a new mechanism. But thank you. You have sealed the truth perfectly.
Now the spirit knows exactly what to look for when the water flows again. Ben, you're alive? Mr. Gray, I am the keeper of the pact, not a victim of the turning. I am simply awaiting the next sign. There was a long pause. Ben held the match close to the journal. Mr. Gray, you know, Mr. Carver, the mill's greatest failure was being confined to wood and water. Next time, the spirit will need something far more powerful, something that can hold all the world's memory and identity in one place. Something digital, something universal. Mr. Gray chuckled, a sound like dry leaves scraping pavement. Mr. Gray, now destroy the journal, witness. Sleep well. Your story is complete. Mine is just beginning. The line went dead. Ben stared at the phone, then at the journal. He had saved Willow Creek, but had he simply ensured that the horror would evolve? He struck the match against the box and held the tiny flame to the thick leather cover of Elias Thorne's manuscript. The dry, ancient leather caught fire instantly. As the flames devoured the pages, Ben closed his eyes, hoping he hadn't just burned the memory of one evil, only to unleash a far greater one.
With the tunnel successfully breached and Supervisor Stone placated by the sudden progress, the Central Pacific resumed its brutal, mechanized pace. The Union Pacific was catching up quickly, and the pressure to complete the final few hundred miles was overwhelming. Eli Thorne was now a hero. His slow, meticulous engineering at Tunnel 6, which had supposedly saved the mountain from collapse, was hailed as a brilliant move of foresight. The Big Four, though still greedy for speed, admired the result. They promoted Eli, assigning him to the final rapid track-laying sections in the Nevada desert, a place where speed was everything and mountains were non-existent. But Eli's heart was no longer in the blueprints. It was back in the granite, tied to the fate of the invisible city. Alun, true to his word, had performed the final act of the conspiracy, the vanishing. Eli arrived at the site of the invisible city 2 days after the final blast, pretending to conduct a survey of a nearby stream. The bowl of land was empty. The turf-roofed lodges had been dismantled, the earth smoothed back over the holes, and the sod replaced. The carefully terraced gardens were gone, the soil raked to look like natural rocky scrub. The blacksmith's forge and the crushing mill, every scrap of metal, every bit of charcoal, every tool, had been removed. Even the subtle scent of medicinal tea and opium was gone, replaced by the crisp, sterile smell of the high altitude. It was as if the community of several hundred people, which had lived and worked there for years, had never existed. Eli walked through the empty space, feeling a strange mix of awe and profound loneliness. They had done more than just relocate. They had erased themselves from the land, leaving no trace for the Guaylo to find. They had engineered their own freedom. He found only one sign that they had been there, and it was deliberately left for him. Tucked into a crevice of the granite outcrop that had shielded the city was a small, polished stone, a piece of quartz the size of his thumb. It was veined with pure, raw gold. Beneath the stone, scratched onto a piece of smooth slate, was a single, simple character in Chinese, E. E meant righteousness or brotherhood based on shared duty. It was a farewell, a thank you, and a promise of silence. Eli pocketed the gold-veined quartz, his only payment and the heaviest thing he had ever owned. He never saw Alun again, nor any of the silent carriers, though he knew they were out there, dissolved into the burgeoning Chinese communities of San Francisco, Sacramento, and the mining towns, using the dragon spine gold to slowly and surely establish a powerful, independent life for themselves. Eli left the Sierra Nevada and was immediately thrust into the frantic, chaotic world of the final race. The Central Pacific was now laying track at a furious pace, trying to match the near-impossible speed of the Union Pacific across the flat Nevada and Utah deserts. This was conventional railroading, sheer muscle, speed, and logistics. No need for fire pickets or silent bores. But Eli carried the lessons of the invisible city with him. He drastically altered the company's supply chain, arguing for smaller, faster mule trains to deliver rations and water, a direct application of Alun's philosophy of efficient, decentralized distribution. He insisted on using the long life nails, the spikes secretly forged in the gallery workshop, even creating new order sheets to cover the fictional purchase of the superior steel. The Central Pacific's track was solid, reliable, and required far less immediate maintenance than the Union Pacific's line, which was being laid so quickly it often buckled under the weight of the supply trains. Supervisor Stone, who remained Eli's direct, irritating superior, only saw the results. "You're a damn genius for organization, Thorne," Stone admitted grudgingly one scorching afternoon, watching a mile of track disappear into the horizon in under an hour. "You found a way to make the Chinamen work like fiends up in those mountains, and now you're making this desert operation sing." "Efficiency, sir," Eli said, wiping sweat from his brow, his voice carefully neutral. "We eliminated the waste." The truth was that the laborers, even those who were not Chinese, were performing better. Eli had integrated elements of the invisible city's lifestyle into the main camps: clean water management, better food preservation, and mandatory rest periods. Though he never admitted the source of the innovation, he used the money saved from reduced supply costs to fund these improvements, raising the overall health and morale of the workforce. On May 10, 1869, at Promontory Summit, Utah, the world watched as the Central Pacific's engine, the Jupiter, met the Union Pacific's number 119. The famous Golden Spike was driven, a symbol of a nation unified by the Iron Horse. The Transcontinental Railroad was complete. Leland Stanford, amidst great fanfare, declared it the crowning achievement of American ingenuity and speed. The telegraph lines instantly broadcast the news across the globe. Eli Thorne was there, dressed in a new, clean suit, standing respectfully behind the major executives. He shook hands, accepted congratulations, and listened to the speeches filled with soaring rhetoric about manifest destiny and the brave Irish and white laborers who had conquered the wilderness. Not a single speech mentioned the Chinese laborers who had performed the hardest, most dangerous work in the Sierra Nevada. They were the forgotten army, the invisible foundation. As the ceremony concluded, Eli felt the polished gold quartz stone in his pocket. Brotherhood. He knew the official history was a beautiful, powerful lie. The true railroad was built on the superior, silent engineering of a hidden culture, financed by a secret vein of gold, and protected by an audacious conspiracy. The Unseen Dynasty. Eli Thorne returned east, hailed as an organizational prodigy. He was made a vice president of operations for the Central Pacific, a wealthy man at 30 years old. He married a prominent Boston socialite, built a respectable mansion, and spent his professional life managing the logistics of the very railroad whose dark secret he kept buried deep inside him. He became one of the railroad barons, a powerful figure in the Gilded Age. But unlike many of his contemporaries, he used his influence subtly, always arguing for better working conditions, safer tracks, and fair wages for all laborers, quietly channeling the principles of the invisible city into the American industrial system. The rise of the tongs. Meanwhile, the dragon spine gold was hard at work. The wealth was never consolidated into one massive fortune that could attract the attention of the American government or the Big Four. Instead, it was diffused through the growing Chinese immigrant communities. Alun and his most trusted associates used the capital to form a network of mutual aid, protection, and business interests, a kind of covert economic consortium. In American history, these groups were often feared and misunderstood, labeled as tongs, a term for association. But Alun's consortium was different. They did not deal primarily in typical illegal enterprises. They controlled the supply of high-quality goods, specialized labor, and reliable credit within the Chinese communities of San Francisco, Portland, and New York. They funded the purchase of prime farmland in California, quietly establishing independent supply chains for fresh produce that bypassed the prejudiced white markets. They operated the fastest, most reliable underground mail system for immigrants seeking to send money and messages back to China. Most crucially, they invested heavily in steamship lines running between Hong Kong and San Francisco, ensuring a safe, non-exploitative passage for new immigrants, often funding their journeys outright, thereby guaranteeing their loyalty. Ah Lun, though never seen in public, became the silent, powerful chief of this network, the mountain elder, known only by reputation and the astonishing, reliable quality of his operations. The invisible city had evolved from a physical settlement into a massive, nationwide, invisible financial and logistical dynasty. Decades passed. The American economy boomed, built on the solid foundation of the Transcontinental Railroad. The Big Four became legendary titans of industry, their names etched in history books. The earthquake and the revelation. The year is now 1906. Eli Thorne is 67 years old, a retired industrialist, respected and wealthy. He lives in San Francisco, still keeping the silent promise of Yi. On April 18, 1906, the Great San Francisco earthquake struck. The city was devastated. Brick structures crumbled, and the ensuing fires consumed miles of wooden buildings. Chaos reigned. In the aftermath, Eli, despite his age, immediately sought to organize relief efforts, instinctively returning to the logistical mastery he had learned in the Sierra. As he walked through the burned-out shell of Chinatown, a district often ignored or condemned by the white authorities, he noticed something astonishing. While the surrounding white-owned infrastructure, banks, major company offices, and apartment blocks had been reduced to rubble and ash, the buildings owned and occupied by the Chinese consortium displayed a remarkable resilience. Many structures still stood, partially damaged but not destroyed. The fires that swept through the wooden city seemed to skip over their properties. Eli realized why: the foundations. He spotted a construction site where workers, organized with military precision, were already clearing debris and starting reconstruction. The superintendent of the site, a sharp, middle-aged man who looked uncannily like the Ah Lun of his youth, recognized Eli. The man approached him, bowing slightly. "Mr. Thorne, we have heard much about your good work in the camps. My name is Ah Chai. My father, he taught me much about engineering." "Ah Chai," Eli said, his heart pounding. "The foundations. How did your buildings survive?" Ah Chai smiled. "My father, the mountain elder, taught us a simple truth. American buildings are fast. They rely on speed and cheap timber. Our buildings, they rely on listening to the earth." He pointed to a foundation that was already being rebuilt. It was not simple concrete, but a deep basket weave foundation of flexible, reinforced timber and local granite. A technique Eli recognized immediately from the shoring principles Ah Lun had used in the most dangerous parts of Tunnel 6. "We knew the earth here was fragile," Ah Chai continued. "When the white men build, they ignore the tremors. They do not listen. We listened. We paid extra for the depth. We built with the flex of the mountain." Ah Chai led Eli to a partially standing building that had been an herbalist shop. Inside, the walls were thick, insulated, and braced with iron strapping that looked suspiciously like the superior quality steel from the secret gallery workshop. "The consortium," Ah Chai said quietly, "we prepared for this earthquake for 50 years. Our buildings, our supplies, our credit, all safe. We built the city twice, the visible city and the enduring city beneath." Eli looked at the resilient framework, at the determined, organized effort of the rebuilding crews, and understood the ultimate triumph of the invisible city: They had not only built the Transcontinental Railroad, they had secretly built the strongest, most enduring parts of the new American economy and culture. The dragon spine, Eli whispered. It paid for all of this. It paid for our memory, Mr. Thorne, Achai corrected him. It paid for our right to be here. The American government made laws against us. They passed the Exclusion Act to try and erase us. But they could not exclude the wealth, the wisdom, and the superior planning that built this new city.
Achai paused, meeting Eli's eyes. My father sends his greetings. He says the railroad you helped build still stands today because of the long-life nails you allowed him to place in the high snows. He says the strength of the mountain is in the foundation that no one sees. Eli felt tears well up in his eyes, not of sadness, but of deep shared pride. The secret was safe, and the legacy was concrete, enduring even through the most catastrophic natural disaster. He reached into his waistcoat pocket and pulled out the gold-veined quartz, placing it firmly in Achai's hand. Tell the mountain elder that the debt is paid, Eli said, and tell him that the real story of the Transcontinental Railroad is not in the history books, but right here in the unbreakable foundation of San Francisco. Achai nodded, the gold rock warm in his palm, a silent acknowledgement of the unbreakable brotherhood of the mountain. The American West had not been conquered by the blunt force of Eastern capitalism, but by the meticulous, silent ingenuity of the invisible city, which had laid a better, stronger, and far more enduring foundation for the future. The Thorne legacy and the mountain elder. The story of the invisible city did not end with the 1906 earthquake. It merely shifted from a tale of hidden labor to one of enduring influence. Eli Thorne lived out his remaining years as a respected philanthropist, dedicating himself to urban planning and infrastructure safety. He knew the superior engineering lay beneath the foundations of his own city, and he worked tirelessly to convince other architects and city planners to adopt flexible, deep-set foundations, citing his experiences with unstable geological formations in the Sierra Nevada. He became the chief proponent for earthquake-resistant building codes, fundamentally changing how San Francisco and other West Coast cities were built. He never revealed Alun's name or the existence of the dragon spine gold. He protected the secret of Yi until his death in 1918. His lasting legacy wasn't just his vice presidency at the Central Pacific, but the fact that the post-1906 San Francisco was built to withstand the future. The $18,000 he left in his will to establish the Sierra Structural Integrity Institute was merely a final, quiet tribute to the man who taught him true engineering. The true cost of the golden spike. As the decades passed, historians continue to celebrate the completion of the Transcontinental Railroad as a triumph of American industry. However, the railroad itself began to show the stress of its divided construction. The Union Pacific's line, built quickly across the flat plains using cheaper materials and often inferior quality labor, required constant maintenance and expensive upgrades. Its rails were often bent, its spikes often pulled loose, and its bridges frequently required reinforcement. The Central Pacific's line, however, was bifurcated. The eastern section, Nevada-Utah, built quickly under the initial pressure, similar to the UP, and suffered from corresponding issues. The Sierra Nevada section, the invisible stretch, this section, which ran through the mountains Eli and Alun oversaw, became known in engineering circles as the most resilient section of track in the entire continent. The rail line that ran over the long-life nails and through the carefully engineered silent bore tunnels rarely required major repairs. It withstood extreme weather, heavy freight, and the inevitable geological shifts with stoic stability. Eli's successors at the Central Pacific spent fortunes maintaining the rest of the line, but the Sierra section remained remarkably inexpensive to operate. They simply assumed the granite was unusually stable, never realizing they were riding over thousands of tons of custom-forged, high-quality steel created in a hidden mountain foundry. The final exchange. The story concludes in 1935, during the height of the Great Depression. The global economy had collapsed and anti-Chinese sentiment was high. The Chinese Exclusion Act, passed in 1882, had crippled the community, cutting off immigration and economic support. The consortium, however, survived. The wealth derived from the dragon spine, having been meticulously invested in land, stable commerce, and gold reserves, provided a deep cushion. While American banks failed, the consortium's internal credit system kept the Chinese-American economy from collapsing.
Eli Thorne's widow, Martha, now elderly and managing the struggling Thorne family estate, received a discreet, unmarked package. Inside was a heavy, sealed envelope containing 20 shares of the newly formed Pacific Western Rail Holdings, the company that now managed the original Central Pacific route. The value was immense, enough to save the Thorne family from financial ruin. Attached to the shares was a single, elegant letter, written in English on fine rice paper. It was signed only with the character Yi. The letter contained the following text: "To the family of the engineer, Mr. Thorne. We have been the silent beneficiaries of your family's wisdom and discretion for 70 years. We are grateful for the superior quality of the railroad track which we use to transport our commerce, and for the safe foundations upon which we rebuilt our home after the Great Fire. The principle of Yi requires that the foundation of our wealth secure the longevity of yours. Your father gave us the time we needed to build our future. We now ensure the stability of his own lineage. Know that the debt is settled, but the brotherhood endures. The strongest track and the strongest city are those built on truth, not speed." Martha Thorne never understood the letter's full meaning, nor the source of the sudden, massive investment that saved her family. She only knew that her late husband's Sierra Structural Integrity Institute was finally going to be funded properly. Epilogue: The Dragon's Legacy. Today, when the California Zephyr train climbs through the Sierra Nevada, carrying passengers across the country, it runs through the famous snowshed-covered tunnels. It is a testament to the brutal, fast work of the Transcontinental effort. But beneath the ground, the foundations of the tunnels Eli Thorne insisted upon remain almost untouched. In the heart of San Francisco, the Chinese-American community thrives, economically powerful and culturally resilient, having survived every major economic downturn and natural disaster since the 1860s. Their success is rooted in the strategic, patient accumulation of wealth that began not with a business deal or a lucky gold strike in 1849, but with the quiet, organized effort of a forgotten people, deep inside a granite mountain. The invisible city is gone, but its legacy, the long life nails, the silent bore, and the resilient foundations of San Francisco are the true, enduring monuments of the American West. The greatest achievement of American engineering was not the railroad itself, but the hidden, successful conspiracy of brotherhood and ingenuity that made the most difficult part of it invincible. The unearthing of the lie. The narrative extends into the mid-20th century, where the secrets of the Sierra Nevada finally begin to surface, not through confession, but through the relentless progress of modern science and infrastructure. The Great Snow Gallery Replacement, 1955. By the 1950s, the original wooden snow galleries built over the Central Pacific track in the Sierra Nevada were old, worn, and in desperate need of replacement with modern, reinforced concrete structures. This massive, federally funded project required tearing out the track and the aging timbers down to the original rock bed. The lead project engineer for the replacement, Dr. Simon Vance, was a meticulous geologist and railroad historian. As his crews began the painstaking demolition of the oldest sections of the track, specifically the high passes near the former Tunnel 6, Dr. Vance encountered a series of anomalies that defied historical records. The first anomaly was the track stability. "Doctor, you gotta see this," reported his foreman one chilly afternoon. "We're pulling out the spikes on this section of rail, and they're holding like they were driven yesterday. They're not the standard 3/4-inch stock from the period. These are thicker, heavier, and the metal, it's pure. Dr. Vance examined the excavated spikes. Historically, railroad spikes from the 1860s were made of relatively soft, low-carbon wrought iron, often brittle from hasty production. The spikes his crew were pulling out were an advanced alloy, high-grade steel, highly resistant to rust, and possessing a resilience far superior to anything documented in railroad supply ledgers until the 1890s. He cross-referenced the spike dimensions with the original Central Pacific inventory records. The standard records showed purchases of tens of thousands of cheap, Eastern-made spikes. There was no corresponding record of purchases for these superior, long-life nails. There's no way these were forged in 1868, Dr. Vance concluded, running a magnet over the clean metal. The metallurgy is 50 years ahead of its time. Where did they come from? The Tunnel 6 inspection. The second, more profound anomaly was found deep within Tunnel 6. Because of its legendary stability, the tunnel had never required significant shoring or inspection. As part of the gallery replacement project, Dr. Vance ordered the first comprehensive geological survey of the tunnel face since 1869. His team used a new technology, high-frequency seismic testing, essentially an underground sonar, to map the rock density and structure around the tunnel. The results for Tunnel 6 were baffling. The seismic readings showed that the tunnel wasn't blasted through the granite in the traditional sense, characterized by a surrounding fracture halo. Instead, the granite appeared to be cut cleanly with minimal microfractures, exactly as if the rock had been removed in massive interlocking blocks. Furthermore, the readings revealed a subtle, unnaturally dense vein that ran diagonally through the granite. A vein that had been filled with a material of slightly different composition than the surrounding rock. Dr. Vance ordered a specialized core sample taken from the filled vein, directly through the tunnel wall. The core was extracted, and Dr. Vance stared at it, speechless. The external layer was the expected granite dust concrete, but beneath it lay a thin, solidified layer of what his tests confirmed was quartz residue mixed with minute traces of limestone cement, the exact mix Alain used to seal the flank mine. More astonishingly, the quartz residue showed unmistakable signs of high-volume gold extraction. The density and trace elements indicated that a vast, rich vein of gold-bearing quartz had once existed along that diagonal line, running precisely where the silent bore had been conducted. Dr. Vance immediately understood the horrifying implication. The historical record of the agonizing delay at Tunnel 6 was a deliberate lie. The slow pace was not due to difficult rock, but to a massive, simultaneous covert mining operation. The railroad wasn't just built through the mountain, Dr. Vance muttered to his chief geologist. It was built around a gold mine. The search for the blacksmith. Dr. Vance spent the next 3 years trying to connect the spikes, the tunnel anomaly, and the historical records. His research focused on the forgotten Chinese laborers. He discovered the Central Pacific's meticulous, though racially biased, payroll records, which showed the astonishingly low wages and high casualty rates of the Chinese crews. He found mentions of a specialized, experimental shoring crew and a temporary gallery workshop run solely by Chinese laborers, which mysteriously disappeared from the ledgers after 1869. The records describe the workshop as a forge for custom iron bracing for the snow galleries. Dr. Vance drove back to the mountains, using old topographical maps and the subtle clues from the railroad's waste disposal logs. He eventually located the deeply secluded, south-facing bowl where Eli had first been led. The site was now completely overgrown, but with the aid of a metal detector, he uncovered evidence of a large, sophisticated subterranean forge and remnants of bamboo irrigation pipes. He had found the former location of the invisible city. Dr. Vance now pieced together the stunning truth. The Chinese laborers, facing exploitation and lacking supplies, established a self-sufficient community, the invisible city. They covertly mined their own high-grade iron, hematite, and secretly forged superior track components, the long-life nails.
They used their own ancient thermal drilling techniques, the fire picket's silent bore, not just to bore the crucial Tunnel 6 safely, but to protect a secret gold vein, the Dragon Spine. The famous delay at Tunnel 6 was a brilliant tactical maneuver to buy time to empty the gold vein, effectively self-financing their own freedom and cultural preservation. The encounter with Achai. Dr. Vance knew the official history of the Transcontinental Railroad was a monumental sham, but he had no proof beyond his geological and metallurgical findings. He needed a witness. His search led him to San Francisco's Chinatown, specifically to the resilient foundations and long-standing businesses that had survived 1906. He tracked down the descendants of the early Chinese laborers, asking specific questions about the mountain elder and the tools of the earth. His inquiries eventually led him to a small, unassuming man named Achai, now an elderly, respected community leader and retired builder, the same man Eli Thorne had met in 1906. Dr. Vance showed Achai the superior spike and the core sample from Tunnel 6. Achai looked at the items, his eyes distant, clearly recognizing them. He did not deny the truth. "You have found the story that the mountain told to no one," Achai said quietly, nodding. Dr. Vance, holding the metallurgical evidence in his hands, was overwhelmed. Why? Why did they do it? Why not just demand better wages? "Demanding wages makes you a better worker," Achai replied, looking directly at Dr. Vance. "Stealing your own future makes you a free man. Your Big Four wanted a railroad. My father wanted a dynasty. The gold bought our ships, our schools, our land, and the freedom to build our own city that no earthquake could take away. This is the greatest secret in American industrial history," Dr. Vance said, trembling slightly. "You stole a national treasure." Achai smiled, a gentle, knowing smile that echoed the strength of his father, Alun. "The mountain was here before your nation, Doctor. The gold belonged to the earth. My people simply knew how to listen to the earth. Your nation took everything from us, our labor, our dignity, our right to emigrate. My father took only what was needed to pay for the future. He called it Yi, justice, brotherly righteousness." Dr. Vance spent the next 10 years trying to publish his findings. The Big Four's descendants, still influential, suppressed his reports. The official history of the Transcontinental Railroad, based on speed and brute force, was too ingrained in the American identity to be rewritten by a quiet story of Chinese ingenuity and organized subversion. Yet, Dr. Vance's legacy was not in public fame, but in private truth. His geological maps and metallurgical findings were preserved, hidden in university archives. They sit there today, a silent, documented truth of the greatest secret triumph of the American West. That the railroad's strongest tracks and foundations were paid for by a fortune of stolen gold, won by the perseverance and engineering genius of the forgotten invisible city. The hidden network of iron and silk. Dr. Simon Vance's discovery, though suppressed from the public, circulated quietly among a small group of academics and engineers who appreciated the profound genius of Alun's operation. This clandestine knowledge allowed them to view the American industrial age not as a monolithic achievement of Western capitalism, but as a dual effort profoundly influenced by a system designed to circumvent prejudice. The interlocking economy. The true genius of the invisible city was its creation of an interlocking economy that benefited both the Chinese community and the American industrial machine, all while remaining unseen. The Dragon Spine gold was merely the seed capital. The enduring system was the flow of goods and labor. The consortium, led by Achai in the mid-20th century, used its funds to dominate two crucial sectors that fueled American cities. Specialized labor brokerage. The consortium established an unassailable reputation for providing honest, reliable, and highly skilled labor, not just for railroads, but for laundries, restaurants, and, crucially, sewing and textiles.
They secretly controlled a vast network of skilled seamstresses and tailors who produced the high-quality uniforms and specialty canvas goods needed by the burgeoning U.S. military and major shipping lines. The iron-hard discipline and superior quality management learned in the Sierra tunnels were applied to industrial textile production. American factory owners found that contracting through the consortium, despite the slightly higher initial cost, resulted in far fewer defects, faster delivery, and zero labor disputes. Resource logistics. They utilized their steamship lines, initially purchased with gold money, to secure monopolistic control over certain high-demand Eastern imports vital to American consumption, such as tea, silk, and specialized herbal medicines. They bypassed layers of white merchants, guaranteeing fresher, higher-quality products directly to consumers in the Chinatowns and, through discrete contracts, to high-end American grocers and pharmacies. In short, Ah Loon's dynasty didn't need to fight the American economy. They simply provided indispensable services that the American system was too chaotic and prejudiced to provide efficiently for itself. The railroads, the military, the factories, and the upper-class consumers all unknowingly relied on the invisible efficiency born from the Sierra Gold. The case of the tunnel collapse, 1988. The ultimate public confirmation of the superior secret engineering arrived nearly 120 years after the Golden Spike. In 1988, a massive rock slide high in the Sierra Nevada caused a major tunnel collapse on the Central Pacific Line, but not on the infamous Tunnel 6. The collapse occurred a few miles west in Tunnel 3, a tunnel completed swiftly and conventionally before Eli Thorne implemented Ah Loon's methods. The collapse was catastrophic, killing 3 maintenance workers and shutting down the Transcontinental line for months. The subsequent investigation was exhaustive and highly publicized. Dr. Simon Vance, now an aging but respected elder statesman of geology, was brought in as a consultant. He argued, against loud protests, that the failure was due to the inherent structural weakness caused by the initial use of reckless nitroglycerin blasting, which had fractured the surrounding rock, the fracture halo, in the 1860s. The granite was weakened from the start, Vance testified. It was built for speed, not permanent.
Then why has Tunnel 6 through the same granite never failed? It was the hardest, slowest mile. It should have failed first. Vance saw his moment. He had preserved the core sample from 1955. Tunnel 6 has not failed, gentlemen, Vance stated, holding up the sample of filled quartz vein, because Tunnel 6 was built differently. It was the slowest mile because the engineers were using an ancient, thermal-based method that cut the rock cleanly rather than fracturing it. They were not just digging a tunnel, they were performing surgical extraction of the granite. Vance then displayed his metallurgical analysis of the long-life nails pulled from the Tunnel 6 section, proving the existence of a superior, non-recorded steel supply. The entire section of the line, overseen by engineer Eli Thorne, Vance concluded, was built with superior materials and superior patient technique, all of which was covertly supplied and managed by the Chinese labor crews. The only tunnel to fail was the one built purely by the American emphasis on speed. The most stable part of our railroad system is a testament to the invisible city. The revelation was a media sensation, though the gold theft was downplayed as an unproven historical theory. The focus shifted to the superior Chinese engineering that had been hidden for a century. The story became a powerful, undeniable historical revision. The railroad was saved, not by American hurry, but by Chinese patience and ingenuity. A new monument. The scandal and the ensuing historical reappraisal led to a major change. In the same year, 1988, a small, subtle plaque was quietly placed near the entrance to the miraculously stable Tunnel 6. It wasn't a grand monument. It was a simple bronze square, installed by a newly formed historical society in San Francisco's Chinatown, secretly funded by the consortium. The plaque's English inscription read, "Tunnel 6, the slowest mile, the foundation of enduring strength." This structure stands as a tribute to the unrecorded engineers and laborers whose patience, superior technique, and dedication to structural integrity ensured the resilience of the Transcontinental Railroad. Below the English, carved in traditional characters, was the full two-character word that embodied Ah Lun's life work. Yi, justice and brotherhood. The plaque was the final formal acknowledgement. The true history of the railroad had finally been written in metal, not in the Big Four's glorious lies, but in the truth of the Chinese spirit. The dragon spine gold had bought not just wealth, but historical recognition. The invisible city, having secured its own physical foundations in San Francisco, had finally secured its place in the American memory, though only those who knew the full story understood the true depth of the Yi etched into the rock of the Sierra Nevada.
The Secret Keeper's Journal. The true, unwritten history of the Transcontinental Railroad found its final voice years after Dr. Simon Vance's public testimony faded into academic obscurity. The key to the dragon spine and the invisible city lay locked in a private journal written by Eli Thorne, the original secret keeper. In 1999, a descendant of Eli Thorne, clearing out the dusty attic of the old Boston family estate, discovered a brittle leather-bound journal hidden inside a steamer trunk marked Sierra Correspondence. The journal was not a professional record. It was Eli's private diary from 1867 to 1870, detailing the emotional and moral transformation he underwent in the mountains. The revelation of the journal. The journal was a breathtaking first-hand account of the conspiracy. Eli had meticulously recorded every step, every fear, and every justification for his actions, writing under the code names The Mountain Architect, Ah Lun, and The Silent Treasury, The Gold Vein. The most stunning entries were not about the engineering, but about the social dynamics and the prejudice he was forced to navigate. Entry, October 1867. O'Malley and the men see only hands and shadows. I see an entire system. Alon's method for storing food in the subterranean pits is better than anything the Quartermaster Corps has devised. He saves more food from rot than we waste. The company records show loss. The truth is, the loss is funding the survival of the invisible city. My lie is a balance sheet that favors survival over profit. Entry, January 1868, The Fire Pickets. The mountain architect showed me the heat-splitting method today. It is slow, agonizing work, but the granite splits clean like wood. He called our nitroglycerin the method of the impatient child. The precision required is supernatural. We are digging the slowest tunnel in the world to extract the fastest treasure. The irony sits heavy tonight. Entry, May 1869, Promontory. I stood on the podium watching Stanford drive the Golden Spike. I smiled for the photographers. The speeches praised speed, grit, and the pioneer spirit. It was all a lie built upon a mountain of truth I cannot tell. The true spirit of this railroad is not in the engine, but in the silent efficiency of the men they refuse to acknowledge. I held the quartz in my pocket, the true spike that binds me to the architect. The railroad is complete. The payment has just begun. The journal also contained a meticulously drawn, simplified map of the invisible city and its infrastructure, the deep-set forge, the water-powered stamp mill, and the precise disguised location of the Dragon Spine vein within Tunnel 6. It was the definitive personal proof that Dr. Vance had searched for decades earlier. The conflict of disclosure. The discovery placed Eli Thorne's great-granddaughter, Sarah Thorne, in an agonizing ethical dilemma. Publishing the journal would shatter one of America's most cherished industrial myths, exposing her ancestor as an embezzler and a corporate conspirator. It would also validate the claims of Chinese American communities regarding their foundational role in the West, which remained politically sensitive even in the late 20th century. Sarah reached out to a historian specializing in forgotten labor movements, but before making the journal public, she decided to seek out the source, the descendants of Lun, the mountain architect. Her search led her, guided by Eli's cryptic notes, to the heart of the consortium's operations in San Francisco, a powerful, discreet, Chinese-owned holding company, the successor to the original network founded with the gold wealth. She met with the great-grandson of Lun, David Chai, a man who controlled vast real estate and financial interests across the Pacific West. Sarah laid the journal on the table. "My great-grandfather's final confession," she said simply. "The truth of the dragon spine, the long life nails, and the gold that funded your family's dynasty." David Chai examined the journal, his expression unreadable until he saw the final, repeated character, Yi. He looked up at Sarah. "My great-grandfather, Lun, spoke of your ancestor with profound respect," David Chai said. "He was the only American with the intelligence to understand and the courage to protect the truth. The gold was the price of our silence, and his reputation was the price of our security. The final bargain." David Chai then revealed the full extent of the consortium's hidden strength. He pulled out a leather-bound folio filled with original deeds and ownership documents. "When your family's fortune was almost lost in the 1930s, David explained, it was not a loan that saved you, it was an investment. The shares that saved the Thorne estate, the Pacific Western Rail Holdings, were purchased by the consortium. Your family has been a silent partner, financially protected by our family for over 60 years. The conspiracy had continued long after Eli's death. The bond of Yi meant that the protection flowed both ways. Eli protected Lun's secret freedom in the 1860s, and Lun's descendants protected Eli's descendants' financial security in the 1930s. If you publish this journal, David stated, you will bring down the legend of Eli Thorne and reveal a truth that, while beautiful to historians, will only serve to fuel renewed scrutiny and legal challenges against the assets that my family worked a century to build. It will invalidate 100 years of sacrifice. Sarah Thorne looked at the journal, at the truth that could dismantle American history, and then at David Chai, the quiet power behind the modern, enduring Chinese-American dynasty. She held the power to destroy both their legacies. The truth is already etched into the stone of Tunnel 6 and into the foundations of this city, Sarah realized. The real monument isn't the book, it's the fact that we are sitting here today, two descendants, both products of a single shared dangerous secret. Sarah made her final decision. She took the journal and instead of publishing it, she donated it to David Chai. Let the story of the dragon spine remain a secret of the family and a foundation for the future, she told him. The American public deserves a hero. We deserve the truth. We will honor the debt of Yi. David Chai accepted the journal, placing it carefully back into its trunk. The truth was now guarded by those who had the most to lose and the most to gain from its silence. The invisible city had achieved its final victory. It controlled not only the economic foundations of the West, but the narrative of its own history. The history books still tell the story of Eli Thorne, the brilliant logistics expert, and the Gold Four's glorious railroad. But only two families know that the railroad's enduring strength is a monument to the greatest, most successful act of industrial sabotage and cultural self-determination in American history. The Digital Cartography Project. In 2025, the American rail infrastructure faced a new challenge: the integration of high-speed rail and automated freight systems. This required the complete digital mapping of every mile of track, including the deepest, oldest tunnels. A major geological and engineering firm contracted by the current rail owners began a high-resolution LiDAR and ground-penetrating radar (GPR) survey of the Sierra Nevada corridor. The project was led by Dr. Lena Sharma, a brilliant structural engineer who specialized in analyzing historical infrastructure failures. Dr. Sharma's team was tasked with creating a digital twin of the entire line. When they reached the section of track encompassing Tunnel 6, the data anomalies Dr. Vance had discovered 70 years prior reappeared, but in far more detail. The GPR scans confirmed the superior density and lack of structural cracking in Tunnel 6, a feature unparalleled in any other tunnel built during that era. More strikingly, the digital twin of the surrounding geography revealed subtle, unnatural contours. The soil mechanics here don't make sense, Dr. Sharma explained to her team, pointing to the high-resolution topographic map. Look at this area, just a mile east of the tunnel. The thermal imagery shows an unusually high geothermal signature that tapers off right here, in this specific bowl. And the seismic density models show clear, uniform subterranean voids that have been carefully filled in, not naturally formed. Her geological team identified the site as a former, massive, intentionally buried settlement. They also confirmed the deep, localized heat signatures consistent with a former iron forge, as well as the stable temperature of large, filled-in subterranean chambers, the exact location of the invisible city, and the vault of the mountain. Dr. Sharma, unaware of the Vance reports, initially dismissed the findings as unexplained historical eccentricities. But the metallurgical data forced her to look closer. The discovery of the long-life nails. The automated track scanning equipment designed to identify metal fatigue repeatedly flagged the rail spikes along the Tunnel 6 section as having a distinct, non-standard spectral signature. They were too clean, too hard, and too resilient. Dr. Sharma ordered samples of the spikes to be extracted and analyzed with modern technology. The findings were identical to Dr. Vance's. A superior high-carbon steel alloy with trace minerals native to the Sierra, the definitive signature of the long-life nails. "This is impossible," Dr. Sharma said, staring at the results. "This steel shouldn't exist in 1868. Someone was secretly forging custom high-grade components on site." She began to search historical records. Her research led her to the suppression of Dr. Vance's papers, the myth of the experimental shoring crew, and the single subtle plaque at Tunnel 6 bearing the Chinese character for Yi. The digital data had finally confirmed the century-old story. The invisible city, though gone, had left its spectral imprint on the landscape, an engineering ghost visible only through advanced technology. The enduring network. The final piece of the puzzle lay not in the mountains, but in the seamless efficiency of the modern supply chain. As Dr. Sharma's investigation gained traction, she began receiving subtle pressure to cease her historical inquiries. The pressure came not from the railroad company, but from an entirely different source. A powerful, quiet holding company based in San Francisco that owned critical components of the automated rail logistics software and several key maritime shipping terminals on the Pacific coast. This company, she soon realized, was the financial descendant of David Chai's enterprise, the Consortium. Dr. Sharma arranged a meeting with the consortium's current CEO, Mei Chai, the great-great-granddaughter of Ah Lun. Mei Chai met Dr. Sharma in a stunning, modern office overlooking the resilient, earthquake-proof foundations of San Francisco. She was professional, calm, and utterly in control. "Dr. Sharma," Mei began, cutting straight to the point, "you have found the story of the invisible city, our family's founding legend. The truth is, that gold funded a century of planning." She walked over to a high-resolution screen displaying the flow of goods across the Pacific. "The American railroad system is built on speed," Mei explained, "but speed is only useful if the supply chain is reliable.
We used the long-life nails to make the foundation of the railroad invincible. We used the discipline of the silent bore to make our business network impervious to failure. She gestured to the map. We control the most efficient, automated ports and supply routes for vital goods flowing through the West. We own the underlying stability of this trade. If our network fails, the entire American high-speed rail system and much of the Pacific trade grinds to a halt. You built an empire on a secret, Dr. Sharma stated, awed. No, we built an empire on Yi, on brotherhood, stability, and superior planning, May corrected. We learned from the mountain that the true master is patience, not haste. We allow the world to run fast, knowing that its foundation, its most critical vulnerabilities, are secured by the system our great-grandfather built. May Chai then made Dr. Sharma an offer. The consortium would fund Dr. Sharma's research institution, allowing her to privately publish the full, unvarnished truth of the invisible city and its engineering feats. In return, Dr. Sharma would agree to a single condition: the most sensitive information, the exact digital location of the old forge, the long-life nail formula, and the active financial holdings of the consortium would remain classified, protected under a permanent confidentiality agreement. You can have the historical truth, May offered, but the source of the enduring stability must remain protected. The history of the railroad will change. The strength of its foundation will not. Dr. Sharma, looking at the immense, undeniable strength of the invisible city's legacy, knew that this final bargain was the ultimate triumph of Alun's vision. The truth was acknowledged, but the power was kept safe. The story of the Transcontinental Railroad, in the end, is the story of two men: the Boston engineer who learned to listen, and the mountain architect who learned to build. It is the story of a secret city built inside a mountain that quietly, enduringly financed its own destiny and built a better America than the one that excluded it.
The story of the invisible city, now known to a select few in the highest echelons of engineering and finance, became an active, albeit hidden, case study in modern infrastructure planning. The core principle, building for permanence over speed, began to influence major national projects. The foundation of modern resilience. Dr. Lena Sharma, having secured the historical truth and the future funding for her institution, dedicated her career to championing what she termed Yi engineering. She argued that America's reliance on rapidly deployed cheap infrastructure, what she called Big Four haste, was a long-term liability, constantly leading to costly failures like the Tunnel 3 collapse. She presented her findings, including the digital maps of the invisible city's superior site preparation and the metallurgical analysis of the long-life nails, to federal transportation committees. She didn't reveal the gold's origin, but focused on the technical achievements. Thermal splitting. Sharma demonstrated how the thermal methods used in the silent bore reduced microfractures in the surrounding rock, dramatically increasing the tunnel's long-term stability. This led to a shift in high-risk boring projects, prioritizing slower, precise cutting methods over massive, shaking blasts. Decentralized logistics. The sheer efficiency of the invisible city's self-sustaining model influenced military and disaster relief planning. The concept of creating highly self-sufficient, mobile, and rapidly deployed construction units designed to maintain operational independence from traditional vulnerable supply lines became a staple of modern emergency response. The consortium, led by May Chai, actively invested in and promoted these changes. They used their financial influence to ensure that federal contracts favored contractors who employed Yi engineering principles, thus cementing the superior standards Alun had established a century and a half prior. Their goal was simple: ensure the entire American infrastructure became as invincible as their secret section of the Central Pacific. The return to the vault. In 2035, Mei Chai made a pilgrimage back to the Sierra Nevada, accompanied by Dr. Sharma. Using the LiDAR data and Eli Thorne's journal coordinates, they located the precise entrance to the vault of the mountain, the subterranean complex where the quartz was crushed and the gold was processed. The vault, carved deep into the granite, remained perfectly preserved due to the stability of the surrounding rock, protected by the very engineering it had financed. Inside, they found no gold. The dragon's spine had been picked clean. However, they found the tools, the specialized, small, tempered steel chisels and drills that the consortium's legendary blacksmiths had forged. These tools, unlike the standardized, mass-produced instruments, were designed for perfect balance and minimal wasted effort. They were works of art imbued with the Yi philosophy. Mei Chai also found a final artifact, a perfectly preserved massive iron ingot hidden in a niche. This ingot was the original batch of steel forged from the local hematite, the very first raw material used to create the long-life nails. It was a solid physical representation of the wealth that truly built the enduring railroad. Mei Chai had the ingot melted down and recast into a series of small symbolic spikes. She sent one to Sarah Thorne, Eli's descendant, completing the final ancestral exchange. She then commissioned a hidden sculpture in a public park in San Francisco made from the rest of the ingot, a subtle, abstract representation of interlocking strength and resilience, visible to all, understood by none, the true monument to the invisible city. The finality of the secret. The astonishing historical story, the secret mining of one of the largest gold fortunes in American history, the industrial espionage, and the founding of a permanent cultural dynasty never entered the public consciousness. The truth was too complex, too subversive to be absorbed into the simplified narrative of American history. The public preferred the myth of the rugged individualists and the fast-paced triumph of capitalism. The story of the invisible city, a collective, silent, and brilliant victory achieved through cultural preservation and superior engineering, remained a private, sacred trust. The Transcontinental Railroad, still running over the spine of the Sierra, stands today as the single greatest physical testament to a hidden history. The Iron Horse continues to rely on the foundation of the long-life nails and the structural integrity of the silent boar. The invisible city achieved not just freedom, but permanence. It secured its wealth, its culture, and its physical place in the West, all while providing the indispensable, quiet strength that holds the visible world together. The echo of Alan's voice, warning Eli Thorne that the mountain requires patience and listening, remains the most important enduring lesson of American history. The archive and the algorithm. The ultimate irony of the secret came to fruition in the late 2030s. As Dr. Lena Sharma's team digitally modeled the entire Central Pacific route using advanced machine learning algorithms, the system began to learn the differences between the sections of track. The AI, designed to predict structural weaknesses and maintenance needs, consistently flagged the sections of track laid with the cheap, conventional spikes, the Big Four haste sections, as requiring high-frequency inspection and eventual replacement. However, the algorithm kept flagging the Tunnel 6 section, laid over the long-life nails and through the silent bore, as an impossible anomaly. The AI could not reconcile the tunnel's age and environment with its predictive zero failure rate. The system designated this section a permanent integrity zone, a stretch of track the system determined would simply never require replacement based on historical failure data. The digital twin of the Central Pacific Railroad, a network built to manage the future, confirmed the permanence of the past. The AI recognized Alun's superior engineering even when human history could not. The shared foundation. The enduring brotherhood established by Eli Thorne and Alun did not fade with the passing of generations. The financial bond of Yi, which had saved the Thorne family, led to a deep, collaborative relationship between the descendants. The current generations of the Thorn family, now operating as engineering consultants, and the Chai family, the consortium, now operating as global logistics and technology leaders, routinely work together. They didn't speak of the gold, the theft, or the mountain. They spoke of foundational principles and long-term integrity. Their shared secret history gave them a unique, cynical understanding of American power and its vulnerabilities. They understood that the true control was never held by the visible figures on the political stage, but by those who managed the flow of commerce and the durability of the national infrastructure. The legacy of the invisible city is not a story of vengeance or triumph over a defeated enemy, but a profound illustration of cultural resilience and adaptive genius. A community, excluded and exploited by a rapidly expanding empire, did not beg for inclusion or fight an unwinnable war. Instead, they used their ancestral knowledge to quietly build a better, stronger version of the system that was meant to crush them, ensuring their survival and eventual prosperity through ingenuity, patience, and unbreakable trust. The Iron Horse, roaring across the continent today, is the ultimate monument to this truth. It is a symbol of American speed built upon a secret, enduring foundation of Chinese brotherhood and justice.
The mountain's silent guardians. In the modern era, the descendants of the original Chinese laborers, the mountain guardians, no longer needed the gold's financial cushion. Their wealth had transcended mere capital, becoming an institutional memory embedded in commerce and real estate. The consortium transitioned into a global infrastructure firm, managing complex logistics chains across the Pacific Rim, its success founded on the Yi engineering principles of its founder, Alun. Each generation of the Chai family, the direct descendants of Alun, maintained a private internal archive. This archive contained Eli Thorne's journal, the original survey maps, and the metallurgical reports from Dr. Vance and Dr. Sharma. It was their sacred text, the unwritten history of their triumph. The current CEO, Mi Chai, regularly took her executive team to the Sierra Nevada, not to manage rail lines, but to walk the overgrown, secret trail to the former site of the invisible city. She taught them to read the landscape, to identify the subtle depressions of the former lodges, the smooth rake of the soil where the gardens once thrived, and the clean, angular cuts of the granite near Tunnel 6. We do not forget that this mountain was our first bank and our first university, she would tell them. The secret is not the gold we took, but the knowledge we gained. We built for the next century, while they only built for the next quarter. That is the definition of Yi. The final unseen exchange. The narrative ends with one last, symbolic exchange, occurring during a major centennial celebration of the Transcontinental Railroad's official dedication. In 2069, on the 200th anniversary of the Golden Spike, the U.S. government commissioned a massive, state-of-the-art tunnel replacement project, ironically, to repair the failing, brittle sections of the original Union Pacific line. The contract to lead the high-precision tunneling was won by an international consortium, whose lead engineering firm was the global successor to the Chai family's company. During the ceremonial contract signing, the current president of the United States, who, due to the nature of American politics, was unaware of the history revealed in Eli Thorne's journal, made a speech celebrating the enduring spirit of innovation and capital that founded this great nation. Standing in the audience were both the descendants of the Thorne family, the current heirs to Eli's engineering legacy, and the Chai family, the heirs to Alun's dynasty. After the ceremony, Mi Chai approached her counterpart, the current head of the Thorne family, and offered a simple, silent gesture of recognition. She didn't speak of the gold or the conspiracy. Instead, she presented him with the single, smooth piece of quartz Eli had been given over 160 years ago, the small stone veined with pure, raw gold. "The mountain gave us this to remember the start," Mi Chai said, her voice low. "Now we will use the wisdom it taught us to build the next 100 years of track. Our two families' debt is not to the past, but to the future." The descendants of the engineer and the architect, the secret keepers of the greatest industrial deception in American history, understood the final profound truth. The true wealth of the American West was not the metal that paid for the railroad, but the unbreakable bond of integrity and brotherhood forged in the darkness of the Sierra Nevada. The foundation of the nation's future was and remains the invisible city.
The preservation of the archive. In the mid-21st century, the collaborative efforts of the Thorne and Chai families culminated in the establishment of a private, non-endowed Sierra Railroad archive. Located discreetly within the preserved 1906-era building in San Francisco's resilient Chinatown, a building whose very foundations were a testament to Ah Loon's superior engineering. The archive housed the physical evidence of the invisible city. The archive contained Eli Thorne's journal, digitally scanned and preserved, detailing the entire conspiracy from the first mention of the Underground River to the final farewell. The journal was the literary heart of the secret. The original core samples, including the segment of the Tunnel 6 granite with the sealed quartz vein, which Dr. Vance had fought so hard to document. This was the geological heart of the secret. The long life nails, a collection of the superior custom-forged spikes along with the metallurgical reports confirming their advanced alloy composition. The industrial heart of the secret. The gold quartz stone, the small thumb-sized rock veined with gold, Eli's only payment, now displayed under protective glass, the financial heart of the secret. The archive was not a museum. It was a temple of foundational integrity, accessible only to the descendants of the two families and a rotating selection of trusted engineers, historians, and academics whose work demonstrated an affinity for unorthodox structural resilience. The archive served as a constant, tangible proof that the greatest American infrastructure achievement was not a tale of capital and speed, but of patience, ethics, and covert genius. The unbreakable bond. The enduring relationship between the Thorne and Chai families evolved into a shared, profound moral compass. They saw themselves not as co-conspirators, but as co-custodians of an essential American truth. When modern controversies arose regarding the ethics of historical industrial practices, the two families, one representing the established Western engineering tradition, the other representing the unseen Eastern mastery, would often take complementary public positions, advocating for corporate responsibility and the long-term cost of short-term gains. Their influence was subtle, but their joint power, backed by a century of silent success and hidden wealth, was immense. The final lasting impact of the invisible city was not just on the railroad, but on the very soul of the communities it touched. The Chinese-American dynasty, founded on the principle of self-determination, became a model of cultural strength and economic stability. The Thorne legacy was purified, its tarnished beginnings forgotten by the public, replaced by the genuine, quiet ethic of Eli's later life, a life dedicated to safety and honesty, lessons learned from a man who listened to the stone. The railroad, the Iron Horse, continues its journey across the North American continent. It runs through the Sierra Nevada, over the same passes, enduring storms, earthquakes, and the simple decay of time. It remains a testament to the visible labor of thousands, yet its most resilient stretch is secured by the invisible ingenuity of hundreds. The invisible city is long gone, vanished into the granite dust from which it sprang. But its foundations are everywhere, in the stability of the track, in the resilience of the San Francisco skyline, and in the enduring, unbreakable bond of Yi that continues to shape the future of the nation it secretly saved. The silence of the mountain still holds the greatest story ever told about the making of America.